The subject is the Kolbrin Bible. The special edition is edited in part by Glenn Kimball, and it's out now at a fairly affordable price for a document of its age and lineage. And I think I've come across a couple of pieces here, Glenn, which reflect this aspect of this book that you spoke of earlier, that being it was seeped in the chivalric code. It was all about training the Knights Templars. It was all about being a kind of a training manual for right-thinking people. And I want to read part of it here. I went looking for prophecy. I couldn't find any in the time that I was looking, but I did find this, and I just think this is way cool. There are 4 codes to live by, according to the Battle Book, Chapter 9, each befitting the peculiar circumstances of the time. The 4 codes are the code of the warrior, the code of the citizen, the code of the kinsman, and the code of the individual. There is the code of women, but that is something exclusively theirs and something which all true men uphold. Again, this focus the Colbrin Bible has on equality is really laudable, but it stands against, I think, what we would have thought of as a perception of the time. Among all men, the bloodied warrior is the most important, for he alone is the guardian protector of the things, whatever they may be, all men value. None can have and hold any cherished belief or valued possession except by the grace of the sharp-edged weapon in the strong right arm and the sturdily protective shield on the left arm. He pledges something no other man can exceed in value, his throbbing life blood. Doesn't that seem particularly poignant in light of circumstances where it seems like every day another soldier is giving his life or her life? On. Yeah. All right, well, we'll come back. We'll get all the calls for Glenn Kimball. It's the Kolbrin Bible, and I know you've got really good questions next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. As I mentioned in the first hour, I want to leave a few minutes at the end of the show here, Glenn, to read an email I got from somebody, and I know you're just going to totally love this story, but a listener in Florida sent along a little something that I want to use as kind of I guess it's sort of a Christmas card at the end of this hour, and I'll share it with you if you'll hang on for it. In the meantime, we just got about 1 million calls for Glenn Kimball, but we always do whenever we have him on. And so we'll go east of the Rockies for Sue and Glenn Kimball on Coast to Coast AM. Sue?
Hi there. Good evening, Glenn.
Good evening, Sue.
First, I have to say that I'm surprised you got the price of the Colbrin down so well, because I paid $75 for my edition.
Well, you got a bargain.
I got a bargain. That's a lot of money for a book.
Is that the New Zealand edition, Glenn?
Yes, okay. $75.
So you've been reading through it a little bit.
Oh, I read the whole thing, but it's not the kind of thing you can read once. You have to really do it in levels. You read through first, and you get a feel for the style,
right.
And then you go through again, and you look for specific things, and you go through again. And it started right off saying, we are writing to you, the unborn, in our future. And we hope you inherit a world that's in good shape, because if you do, then we did our job well. And if you don't, then we have failed you. That's how it starts out. It's really beautiful. It's an incredible book.
I hope I've been reading good passages from it, too. I'm trying to do it justice, but there's so much there. It seems
you really have to do it in levels, Ian. It's not possible to do it in one reading. It's the kind of thing you really have to go back again and again. It's a wonderful book. It's extraordinary the way it approaches the whole subject. That's what you mentioned something earlier about. You felt it had a very Celtic feeling, and you were both talking about how these gods came down, and the women were so beautiful that they had to hide them or help them escape or something like that. I forget exactly how your conversation went, but what that called to mind was Thor Heyerdahl was writing a book when he died. It was called In Search of Odin, and he placed Odin, Wotan, Odin.
Sure. Wednesday, right?
Yeah. he placed him on the Sea of Azov, just above the Black Sea, and they found texts and relics there that referred to how their blonde and white-haired women were always being kidnapped. They were so harassed by people making war on them just for these incredible women that they moved en masse further north so they could avoid this sort of attack. And it really worked in well with what you were discussing earlier.
Yeah,
Kolbrin.
I could see that. Well, I appreciate that, Sue. Are there any questions you get out of it that you want to run by Glenn while you have the chance?
No, not now, but what I do want to ask is an earlier conversation. What happens when you get on the phone is you go on hold a long time. And the question I had is really relevant to something that was said half an hour ago.
Okay, well, good enough then.
All right, you were discussing aliens and all the texts, and Glenn was referring to how many texts around the world keep making references to these aliens. All right? The big ones, the little ones, the giants, the Elohim and all this. By extension, you're describing religions and our worship, whether, especially if we're Christian, as worship of people who are descended from aliens. And if you're a Christian, this would put Jesus in that category. How do you explain this? It's like a double think. You're saying, no, it doesn't apply to Jesus, but it applies to everybody else. How do you work this out in your minds?
Well, let me respond to say that none of us originated here. We all originated from someplace far off. The fact that there are civilizations and life forms throughout the universe that were created by the Almighty, the Unbegotten One Himself, shouldn't be news to us. And the fact that they have interest in who we are as being members of a broadened family, so to speak, shouldn't be news to us either. We in our day, we view aliens as being aberrations, a separate science than that of religion. And once again, back to what Ian and I were talking about, these were never separate discussions at the time of the writing of the Colbrin. These were all one discussion. They were all housed in the same vernacular, in the same course of study. The concept that Adam and Eve were members of a larger fraternity of beings, the Elohim themselves. We go back to Genesis. It said, "Let us make man in our own image," male and female. Who are the us and who are the our? It's certainly a broader fraternity than a single individual.
Fair point. Thank you, Sue. And we would explore that more, but we just have so many people waiting on hold right now. Let's go west of the Rockies for Jeremy on Coast to Coast AM for Glenn Kimball. Jeremy?
Yeah, thank you. I feel the idea that it's a Bible is pretty bizarre, and the notion that it has some Christian implication is somewhat ludicrous, especially considering the authors flatly deny that Jesus could possibly be a Messiah. But
let me stop you for a second, because you make bizarre and ludicrous in there. So I want to kind of push on that a little bit. What's so bizarre about thinking of it as a Bible? I mean, Bible is a very generic term.
Because Bibles typically codify a belief system, and I don't see any of that in here.
Have you read it?
Well, I want to respond one thing about that.
Yeah,
too.
My specification about the denial of Jesus being a Messiah is it's in the back in Jesus Part 2.
Well, let me respond that we treated that in the very first hour.
Well, more importantly, though, the copy that I have is copyright 1994, and from the Hope Trust in New Zealand, and I'm assuming that my copy differs from your copy.
Why do you assume that?
Well, I would think it would be a pretty low life form that would violate international copyright law. So I was wondering, what are those differences?
Man, you are argumentative. I mean, really, honestly, now
Would you just flatly copy a book that was?
No, I don't think there's anything. I mean, I don't know who you're working for or what your point is, but I mean, let's not get into name calling about low life, and let's chill on that. If you want Glenn to respond, let's give him a chance to respond. Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, to respond to the first part, we treated it in the first hour, that the Templars were really descendants from the cousins of Jesus, John the Baptist, and they did not believe that Jesus was the antecedent of the Messiah. They felt that John the Baptist was, but that's an aberration of an evolution over time, copying the book over and over again, rather than a real understanding of the original text themselves. And if you get into the materials that are going to come out in the future, which deal specifically with the life and times of Christ, you'll see how this is really a very religious manuscript and a very Christian manuscript. In terms of copyright 1994, our text does differ from that. You must remember that in 1992, that there were various and sundry copies of it sent to very specific organizations around the world to preserve this text. It was never entrusted to one entity on an island in the Pacific to be responsible to disseminate this into the world. The originators of the text sent it to various people with the understanding that each of them would be responsible to spread it, because they felt that the time of the ending times were here, and we can say that it belongs to one person or another, but that's like saying that the Nag Hammadi text belongs to one person or that the Bible belongs to one organization. This really is a text that was never intended to belong to one single sect or one single group of people, especially isolated from the rest of the world. It was sent deliberately to other people, and it has deliberately survived in our world. And the purpose of the original manuscript donors have fulfilled their purpose in sending it to a variety of people, and that's just the nature of the beast.
Well, I want to go back to his point about it not having. That the Bible was Bible is a Bible on the basis of, how did he describe it? That it teaches like some kind of system of beliefs, and even the Holy Bible has lots of different beliefs that are taught along the way, and there are 4 Gospels that aren't ratified in their beliefs, and there's lots of different parts of the New Testament that doesn't agree with the Old Testament, and there are 2 different versions of stories and of many stories in the Old Testament. I just don't think that that's a fair criteria. I think that there's actually the best part about the Kolbrin Bible is all of the instruction, and it's all of the wisdom literature that's passed along. I think that's the strength of it, but that's just me.
We should, and we're going. Anytime there's something new on the horizon, there's always the critics.
Well, I mean, that was a kind of hostility that spoke from. I don't know whether he's connected with the Hope Trust or something, but let me just ask you, speak directly to his question. What percentage of differentiation is there between this one and the one that was previously published?
There's not a lot, because they come from the same source. They come originally from the Hope Trust.
So 1%, 2%?
I don't know. I think it would be greater than that.
Okay. David, first-time caller line on Coast to Coast AM. David? Talking with Glenn Kimball. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Kimball about the Old Testament codes and what he thinks of those, and what he thinks about if there's a code in the Kolbrin Bible.
I think there are a lot of codes. In fact, one of the interesting points is that Aesop, from Aesop's Fables, who was the predecessor of Socrates, he was in possession of these codes as well, and we're doing some research specifically on Aesop, who was blind and deaf and mute at the time he was born. He was healed by one of the princesses of Isis, who, by the way, knew. These people very much knew about Scota. These codes of morality that were spoken of by Aesop are very similar in nature to the codes that are mentioned in the Kolbrin Bible. I know that doesn't directly address your issue, but it is a brilliant question, and I don't think that we could definitively answer that. I think you've asked a question that is an open door and a window into the future for people to define. But certainly, moral principles are a core concept within the Kolbrin. It has entire sections on delineating moral principles and et cetera, et cetera. So,
but nobody's done a code search or anything like that in the Kolbrin that you know of. like a code like you would see like embedded language or, sort of implicit sort of some of the Bible code work that people have been doing?
No, not at this point. I anticipate there'll be thousands of different types of research done on this manuscript.
As it gets out there more. Wildcard line, Alex on Coast to Coast AM. Alex?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, I wanted to ask him, I was initiated in Freemasonry. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, we're listening.
Okay, and when I was initiated, I was shown the head of John the Baptist, which is, I am not participating anymore in Freemasonry or any kind of mystical group, but when that happened, I remember that I was shown that head. It looked pretty much like someone that was alive and was beheaded, but it could have been a fake one. I don't know. And it comes to my mind what your gentleman was saying about the Templar Knights, and I'm trying to make a relation between these Templar Knights, John the Baptist, and Masonry. So could it be possible that the secrecy of the Templar Knights is still going on Freemasonry as a number one secret power, which is headed by the Illuminatis? This is my opinion, my question.
Go ahead. Thank you, Glenn. Go ahead.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I don't want to disclose the secrets of the Masonic Order. That they hold those things very sacred. But you nailed it right on the head, my friend. These people were extensions of the Templars, who were, in fact, members of the Fraternal Order of John. I told George Norrie about this on a program some weeks ago, and I think it surprised him a little bit that one of the reasons why this cave in Jerusalem that they've just discovered this last year only had the picture of John the Baptist on the wall and not that of Jesus was because this was a Templar site. The Templars were the guardians of the pilgrims between Jerusalem and the Western Europe, and certainly that they would have had sites where they kept people safe, and this cave only had the picture of John the Baptist because of their bias toward John the Baptist.
If you're talking about John the Baptist, though, Glenn, I would refrain from saying nailed on the head if I were here.
Okay.
I'm just, no, I'm kidding.
You and my wife would get along extremely well, Ian.
Andy is on the wild card line for Glenn Kimball on Coast to Coast AM. Andy?
Yes, good morning, Ian and Glenn. I have two questions. Number one, in your opinion, does the manuscripts validate any of the teachings of British Israel and the worldwide church? And I have a second question after that.
Absolutely. Go ahead and ask your second question.
Yeah, I think absolutely is the answer. It's a
times 10.
Yeah.
Okay, my second question is this, and I hope you don't take this in the wrong way, but Glenn, do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior who has died on the cross for yours and everybody's sins?
Pardon me, but yes.
Okay, if that is the case, how can you present a manuscript that espouses a philosophy that denies the dying of on the cross, or let's say the deity of Jesus?
I don't.
You're saying this manuscript actually states that Jesus is our Lord and Savior?
I'm saying that in the context that you're speaking, probably we would have a different definition, but there are texts within the Bible that Jesus said it best, that he had more trouble with his family than he did with any other group of people. That does not mean that the manuscript is worthless. You cannot pick out a single passage from the Bible and use that to validate the Bible, because I could show you things in the Bible that are definitely influenced by cultures, politics, and times, which could not possibly be true.
Well,
let's leave it. Should we throw it out? No.
Well, not to mention, does that mean we don't study Nag Hammadi? Do we not study the Dead Sea Scrolls? Do we not study anything? I mean, that would be repeating the errors of our past, I believe. We'll start off with Robert on the wild card lines. When we come back, we're opening them up for everybody jumping in the conversation with Glenn Kimball and the Kolbrin Bible on Coast to Coast AM. A lot of callers for Glenn Kimball, and we'll try to get to everybody before the hour runs out on us. We're talking about these ancient voices that warn us of a space threat, that give us a glimpse of the creation and the recreation of humankind. We talk a lot about the wisdom of the book. I can't say enough about it. It's really very interesting, the compelling rules by which to live, the instruction for young men and women on how they should carry themselves. There's just so much here in the Kolbrin Bible, and so many people on the phone that want to talk about it. Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. Glenn Kimball's special edition is the Kolbrin Bible. Robert is on the wild card line to talk about it with him on Coast to Coast AM. Robert?
Hi, Ian. I listen to you every Saturday, and first off, I want to thank you for the very professional way in which you handle your interviews each week. For example, 2 weeks ago when you interviewed Dr. Campbell, even though you're not a vegetarian, you were very fair with him.
Well, I'm a vegetarian. I'm not a vegan. So
okay.
that's where I draw the line. I keep trying to think about it, but I don't know. I like my cheese too much.
But you really do a good job every Saturday. And Mr. Kimball, I've been studying your website for 3 months, and I think you have one of the best historical sites on the entire Internet. And I want you to know there are people out there that really appreciate all the hard work you've put into your website.
Amen.
I appreciate it very much. And there's a telephone number, by the way, on that website. We want to give it before the end of the hour.
Okay, go ahead.
I have two quick questions for you, Mr. Kimball. Number one is, does the Colbrin reveal whether Nibiru is an inhabited planet? Is there life forms on it that will direct its course when it comes by us again? And my second question is, earlier in the show you said that Edward Longshanks invaded Wales in order to burn down Glastonbury Abbey. I thought Glastonbury Abbey was in England.
Yeah, I did too on that, and that was. But I was curious, what did you mean by that, Glenn? I'm glad you brought that up again.
Wales is in England.
Well, you're saying he invaded the part of England that was Glastonbury Abbey at that time was not formally part of Edward Longshanks' proper territory. Is that what you're saying?
It had been given as a gift. The 12 hides of Glastonbury. Each of the hides was 160 acres in dimensions. This was given as a gift, a sacred gift by the very Christian king Arviragus to Joseph of Arimathea, and it did operate as a sovereign nation. For in a quasi sense of the word, it didn't ever pay taxes to the crown.
Right. It was very successful. It was kind of a self-contained unit. Right.
That's correct.
Okay, but that was the Wales piece that actually threw me off too. I made a note of it. I meant to ask you. Let's go to Abe, east of the Rockies on Coast to Coast AM. Abe?
This is actually Ed from Birmingham.
Oh, glad to have you.
Yes, I have several questions and a comment on what an earlier caller might have been, his concerns might have been. If I might lead with a comment, then I'd like to ask my questions.
Yeah.
The comment, I think he was concerned about if this particular Bible propounds a Gnostic view of Christ and how the material and spiritual world interrelate as it relates to the incarnation and the purpose of Christ on the cross. I think he's concerned about that being contradictory to what Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and most traditional Protestant churches would even claim about the incarnation.
And it might.
As distinct from Gnosticism.
And it might.
And but my question about the Bible in particular, does it have any relationship to a church that claims to predate the Roman Catholic Church called the Church of Joseph of Arimathea? Does it have any relationship to that church? And also, does it purport to be divinely inspired, and are there any particular human authors that it attributes itself to, or does it claim divine inspiration?
That's a good question. That's a really good question.
Well, now I'm confused over the three questions, but
all right, we'll go through.
The first above ground Christian churches were called Chaldee, and they sprung up in Great Britain simultaneously with the exodus of the faithful of Joseph of Arimathea and company into Brittany. And so, yes, they were very much were. And in terms of inspired, I think we might suggest that this was, as I said at the very first part of the program, this is more like the curriculum that was taught at those that educational institution, rather than pretending to be the holy book of the people. It was to teach them about of the creation of the world, Moses, Adam and Eve, Jesus, and on the list goes. And to them, that was not a different course of study. To us, it is. From our perspective, it is a different course of study. To them, it was not. However, looking back in hindsight, the book I don't think was ever intended. I call it a Bible because it is a collection of many books, and it treats many of the Christian subjects, Judaic-Christian subjects. I should include both ends of that. But intended to be the holy words of the prophets. It does not pretend to be that, and does not quote from the words of the holy prophets. It does report to be a curriculum that was used to instruct their people about the creation of the world and their mysticism and spirituality and religions.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but it may challenge views. I mean, I would expect that it would. I think people should know that going into it, but I don't think that means that you can't read it.
I don't think. I think if you are a person who wants to know the rest of the story, the truth from its broadest perspective, if you have a hunger and a fire in your gut that says, "Hey, man, I want to know what's really going on," then you turn to the curriculum, the course of study. You try and find out about what really happened. And the fact that the Colbrin is no more Gnostic than Fly the Moon in the traditional sense of Gnosticism. Gnosticism primarily came out of Egypt, but I think you'd find fault in the same way you found they find fault with Gnosticism.
Well, let's just leave it there for now and just go to Brian, west of the Rockies on Coast to Coast AM, because he's got a question for Glenn Kimball. Go ahead, Brian.
How you doing, Ian?
Terrific, thank you.
Love Coast to Coast. Glenn, my question is, I just recently, I know a lady and a friend of mine that got me a book. It's called Language of the Birds. I want to know if you ever heard of it.
The what?
The Language of the Birds.
The Language of the Birds.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that ring a bell?
It's out of print now, and it's a very rare book, very difficult.
Well, if it's out of print, Glenn probably has it.
It's probably over in that dusty corner.
Probably is.
Real small book. It's got a picture of a man walking. He looks like he's got a bird of a head on the front of it with palm trees. It looks like paradise. Well, anyways, what I'm saying is, basically, you have to keep an open mind, because I think it was Socrates that says wisdom begins in wonder. And so if you have this wonderful, like you said, fire, you described me when you said that, to seek truth and to just whatever, you got to keep an open mind. You can discard what, doesn't make sense and just keep an open mind and don't get labeled and guilt and shame and all that stuff. And I think you're gonna fly pretty good.
Well, I think, you talk about the Book of the Birds. I remember visiting the exposition that toured the British Museum and the Louvre in Paris that contained the Sumerian artifacts of the Anunnaki. And one of the interesting sculptures, or one of the interesting archaeological pieces that comes directly out of that era of time, which is labeled the picture of the Anunnaki, is a man who is clearly nailed to a cross of wood. And I would like to ask somebody sometime about that. But the truth of the matter is even from the Sumerian text and from the oldest Sanskrit text and from the Lemurian text and from the Mayan text, every single one of these civilizations believed in the coming of this personage that would be nailed to a cross and be resurrected and eventually would be come back after an apocalyptic era of time and usher in a period of 1,000 years of peace. So, if you're interested in that, if it burns inside of you like it does me, I'm fascinated. I want to know the rest of the story.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just want to say that if that's who you are, you cannot leave these precious things alone. This is more precious than gold. You cannot just hold up your scriptures and say, this is all the history there ever was, because it was never intended to be.
Mike, wildcard line for Glenn Kimball on Coast to Coast AM. Mike?
Yes.
Here's your chance.
Yes. Am I on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, Glenn. I just heard you when you first come on, and I was almost exalted in what you were saying. I have to get a copy of your book, and would you please sign it? I went over to Germany in September. I walked in the steps of the divine. I sat in the chambers of the religious people, both good and bad. I sat where the Pope sat and where Martin Luther. And since childhood, I've been knighted in a special thing, and I didn't know what my calling was. Well, I did, but I can't say it right now. But I have the proof in the document.
Okay.
And between you and Mr. The guy that does the conspiracy, I'd like to talk to you and get a few things straightened out with him.
Well, let's find.
Is there childhood? What has happened in the last 3 years?
Okay. Well, hang on a second. Hang on, Mike. Is there a way to get Mike an autographed copy, Glenn?
All he has to do if he purchases it over the web is that there's a comment line to say, please sign the copy, or he can dial the toll-free number, which we will give on the air, and request that we sign the copy. I'd be delighted to do that. That's I'm not. I still don't know why people would want my signature, and I'm nobody. Well, they ought to get your signature.
I don't think so. Why don't you give the number right now, and then we'll give it again?
Yeah, it's toll-free, 888-904-9394. And don't expect anybody to answer it tonight. It'll be begun to be answered in the morning. And if the voicemail is all booked up, please call back, because I will take all the messages down and I will respond to all of you personally if it takes me a week.
Okay. 888-904-9394. We go to Don on the first-time caller line for Glenn Kimball on Coast to Coast AM. Don?
Yes. In Austin, Texas.
Glad to have you.
Glad to talk to you. I want to first thank you both for being important people in a world of subjects that need to be touched on, and I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much for jumping in then.
My comments, I have to. First, I want to know if you or your guest have ever heard of this. I was reading a book on the Knights Templar. I can't remember the title, but it just shows how sometimes historical events can affect superstition. In the book, it said that where we got the origin of Friday the 13th
right.
was that was the date that the current royalty decided they wanted to take over the Knights Templar to gain their riches, and that the date that all the Knights Templar were burned because they wouldn't tell the secrets that they knew was on Friday the 13th, and ever since then, that has been an unlucky day.
Yeah, that's one of the stories that goes out for the origins of Friday the 13th. The other being that just Friday in general was an execution day, which you go back to, any Friday was bad, but that particular day, one of the stories is that was the day of the mass executions of the Knights Templar. That's when the Knights Templar were kind of purged. Isn't that right, Glenn?
That's correct. It was, and by the way, there were Templars that escaped, and they all went to Scotland.
Right.
And that's why we get the Masonic, the Templar, the continuance of the Templars, the preservation of the Colbrin comes from Scotland. The Masonic order comes out of Scotland, and that's why the bias is in this text for the Templars. Is because it was preserved by the Scottish rites. But you're right. Friday the 13th, Clement the Fair, who had living in his palace, Clement the Fifth was the Pope, and Philip the Fair was the monarch. I apologize, it's getting late. But that's when they sought after the Knights Templar. Philip the Fair was deeply indebted to the Knights Templar. He had borrowed to the maximum. He was the one who put the charges against the Templar in hopes of forgiving the debt of France, to exonerate them from that debt, because he just couldn't afford the debt.
Sure. Wildcard line. Did that get all of Don's comments? I hope it did. Wildcard line, Jerry on Coast to Coast AM, and probably our last call. Jerry? Oh, go to international? Okay, Dino then on the international line on Coast to Coast AM. Dino?
Hi, guys.
Hi, you're going to be our last call.
Very nice show.
Thank you.
I would like to know if there's anything related to the Lost Tribes.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, you touched on something there. Go ahead, Glenn. It's absolutely such a brilliant question. I'm glad you asked it. The 10 Lost Tribes were captured by the Assyrians in the 8th century BC. They migrated all the way up through the backside of the Black Sea, through the Caucasus Mountains, down through the Po Valley, and the farthest western extension of the Lost 10 Tribes. These tribes were never lost. We have maps of where they went. And the final extension of them was through the Saxons, who called themselves the Sons of Jacob, were in Europe and Scandinavia and went down into Great Britain. And the Kolbrin is the lost Bible of the lost tribes. I'm sorry, but that's something that I feel strongly about, that this is the legacy of the lost 10 tribes. It is their instruction. It is their course of study. Brilliant question.
And it's there for us, too. AncientManuscripts.com. Link up to Glenn at coasttocoastam.com. And go ahead and give that the toll-free number again.
The toll-free number is 888-904-9394. I do it in kind of a rhythm so that people can remember it. But don't expect it to be responded to this evening, but we'll get back to every single person that is able to put a voice message on there, and if there is no space left, call back in a day or two, and I'll be sure and get a hold of every one of you if it takes a week and I don't sleep and eat for a week.
Well, I hope you get a little time in there, that being, the holiday time and all. You don't want to spend it entirely working too hard, but I think it's nice that people might be able to get these out in time to turn them into presents, too.
If you want the first copies of the Colbrin, you're going to have to do it on the web. The ones that come on the phone are stacked behind those.
Well, then it's probably a good transition into this last piece I wanted to read. So you want to hold with me here, Glenn?
Yes, sir.
This comes from a woman named Deborah, and this is an email I got this week. I just thought you'd enjoy this story because it says so much, I think. She said, "This past year I've had many problems with people taking advantage of my trust. I'm very poor and have a disability. I live with my little dog. Last night at midnight, when I usually turn on Coast to Coast to listen for the next 4 hours, I found myself so depressed that I decided to spend money I really don't have on a bouquet of flowers and a cheap pair of shoes to make myself feel a little better. At the store, I also put in my basket some inexpensive beads to make a necklace and a couple of other things. I added some cinnamon buns, too. I never eat that stuff, but I've heard that it helps with depression, so just once in a while won't hurt. I chose a bright-colored bouquet of flowers, and as I was ringing these things up at the self-checkout, a young man with a short mohawk haircut walked past and noticed I had flowers, and he jokingly thanked me for buying them for him. I smiled, recalling some of my own radical haircuts in my day. Just as I was ready to pull my card to pay for the purchase, the young man walked up to the checkout, put his credit card in the machine, and explained that he was paying for my bill. I was in shock and asked him if he was rich, and he said that he was just in a good mood and insisted. The bill was about $25. The cashier, myself, and other customers were wide-eyed and smiling. I offered the young man cash, but he declined and said that, "Have a good night." I thanked him, and as I left the store, I felt bad about everything that led up to that. It was wonderful, and for the first time, a man had bought me flowers in 10 years, not to mention the other things. Usually bad things happen to me, Deborah writes. Thank you, young man. Yes, thank you, the man in the mohawk, for that. And it's a reminder at this time of giving of the power of a present. If you feel inclined to give a gift to somebody, small or large, don't talk yourself out of it. Don't think about whether or not the person down the line will appreciate it or whether they'll think you're silly for doing it. Just go ahead and go with it. Give that present. Because the power of a present is the power of the present.
From a man who really loves Christmas, Merry Christmas to you all.